Hello and welcome to a rather special episode of The Shelf. For this episode I won't be talking about one particular book in depth, but I'll be briefly going over all the books that I've read prior to this series actually starting. My goal here is to basically have a catalogue of every book I've ever read on my YouTube channel. However, there is a chance that I might in the future want to do a whole episode on one of these books in particular, so first up, we've got Edwin A. Abbott's Flatland, a very cerebral, weird, romantic story set across different dimensions. The main character is a square, eventually a cube. Next is Beneath the Skin. This is by a collection of different authors, such as Naomi Alderman and Ned Bowman. Each essay basically details a organ or specific part of the body and romanticizes it and gives it more depth and flavour in a historical context for you to appreciate it more. It's definitely worth a read, especially if you're interested in biology or just prose. Next is the first three Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books by Douglas Adams. The first two in particular are brilliant. The third one I wasn't a big fan of, and it's kind of waned my enthusiasm for the fourth and fifth book of the trilogy of five. I will get around to them at some point. But the third one in particular was a canned script for a Doctor Who episode that Douglas Adams was writing at the time, and he reformatted it for a Hitchhiker's Guide episode, and I don't feel like it worked. But I digress. Next is Diary of an Oxygen Thief by Anonymous. I wasn't a fan of this. I really wanted to like it. I had it on my shelf for a while and was excited to read it, but when I actually got around to it, I hated the character. I wasn't a fan of the story. The moral was mixed. It just felt like a wannabe Catcher in a Rye. One day I might actually go over that or its sequel, Chameleon in the Candy Store, which I'm interested in reading, but we'll see. Next up is Isaac Asimov. I'm missing his short story Youth, which was really, really good and incredibly short and definitely worth a read for the twist. But I've read the first three books of his Foundation series. That's the original trilogy. Psychohistory in particular is a brilliant idea. Unfortunately, I feel like some of his prose is a bit too dorky, but I enjoy it a lot, but not as much as I enjoy the other book, I, Robot, a collection of short stories that conceptualize the laws of robotics, and its legacy has lived on through so many books. Next up is Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. I haven't seen the TV show yet, although I've heard a lot of good things about it, but I thought it was a brilliant feminist dystopia with some interesting themes. The plot was a bit muddled, I felt at times, but perhaps I need to reread it when I'm older. Who knows? Next is Ian Banks' The Wasp Factory. This was recommended to me by my old social science professor, and I'm glad he did recommend it because I read it in one sitting, and that's the best thing you can say about it is you will not want to stop reading. It's got this disturbing urban horror edge to it. It's quite pointless, a bit like Diary of an Oxygen Thief, in that you end up going, great, don't know what I read there, but it was something. Next is one of my favourite collections of poems, Le Fleur du Mal by Charles Baudelaire. Probably not considered decadent anymore, but at the time it was so decadent that it got Baudelaire in quite a lot of trouble. I might do a video on Baudelaire at some point in the future, specifically Flowers of Evil. Next on this list is a play by Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot. Absurd, existential, reminiscent of Camus. It tells the story of two unusual characters waiting for another character that may or may not ever arrive, and it's very good. Next is Aphra Behn's Orinoco. This is this is very reminiscent of Romeo and Juliet. It tells a story of slavery, racial discrimination, love, misogyny, and ultimately freedom. Another book that I'm missing is Eunoia by Christian Bach. Yeah, that's it. One short story told 5 different ways, where he's only allowed to use that one vowel. I love writing that plays with the form or plays with the instrument itself. Next is a book I didn't enjoy, John Boyne's The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. Overly romanticised. It's got some elements that are definitely worthy of praise, and I won't say that I wasn't touched by the ending. Next is one of the big dystopias, Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. A brilliant tale of anti-intellectualism, anti-literacy, and a horrible portrayal of a future where everyone is tuned to screens at all times and never really picks up a book. But thank God we have the shelf for this, right? Next is local Manc Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange. Awful cover. A brilliant tale of nurture versus nature, with moral philosophical questions on whether or not we should condition our more malefactor, latent individuals of our society, or leave them be. You know, whether a default state, even if it's violent, is more morally agreeable than a altered state that's peaceful. It gets into a lot more than that. Language and expression of self is just a stellar book all around, really. And then on the less good side, we've got Tim Burton's The Melancholy Death of Oyster Boy and Other Stories, a collection of weird parable aphorisms of nonsense. I try to like it. I've read it 3 times now, and I just try to like it. And just like Tim Burton's films, the more I indulge, the less I enjoy. I used to be such a big fan of his, but he's really kind of lost it, I feel. Next is Albert Camus' The Outsider, or The Stranger. So, The Outsider is a weird take on guilt, personal responsibility, pointlessness, and absurdism. It's definitely literature you have to check out. It's in my top 15 books, if not top 10 books of all time. I'll probably touch on Camus a bit on this channel, we'll see. I'm missing The Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card, but it's a fun little ditty written by a American Mormon author about a shonen kid being sent to space to inadvertently win a war because he's just that good. But what I do have is Lewis Carroll's absurd nonsense that is Alice's Adventure in Wonderland, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I love the fact that this book almost means nothing, that you can try to get themes and motifs and morals from it, and they do exist, but in essence it is a book of nothing, and I love it. I'm following the theme of fairy tale whimsy. Let's take a look at Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber, which is a gothic horror tinged recreation of those fairy tales we all used to love, Puss in Boots or Red Riding Hood and things like that, but she adds her own spin to it, and they're very good. And they've also got some very interesting feminist undertones, quite a few of them. So it's definitely worth checking out, this one. Kumakunda by Keiyo Shingonyi is a brilliant collection of dissonant poems, which by my interpretation really detail the disparity between being where you're born from and where you now are, and the identity that you hold between those two cultures, and how they're always at odds with one another. And it's brilliant. And some of the interpretive dance poetry that he's put on YouTube is also very interesting. So this is the only Agatha Christie book I've read, and then there were none, and I loved it. I only read it last year, and I've picked up a lot of her other books now, and I'm going to get around to them at some point. And I know some of them are rubbish, and I haven't actually read any of the Poirot books yet. I actually read this around the same time that I read The Outsider by Camus, Disgrace by J.M. Coetzee, and it has quite similar themes of personal responsibility and owning up for that which you don't actually feel guilty for, even if in the eyes of society and the law and the people around you, you should feel guilty. It's also got a lot of tones of comic retribution. Now, I'm missing all the Artemis Fowl books, but like, forgive me for not crying. I'm gonna get them one day to add them to my bookshelf, but I've literally forgotten half of the plot, like most of them. I remember the first book and that's it. And I tried to remember it more by watching the trailer to the movie coming out. That didn't help. That looks awful. I'm also missing the first couple of books of this series because I got rid of them when I was in high school and didn't care about book collecting as much, but The Hunger Games, quintessential young adult reading, if you're into... This is like how many books in a row that I've not liked that I've read, but here we go. Joseph Conrad's The Heart of Darkness. Some of the racist undertones really rubbed off on me. I understand he's not natively English, and his prose is stellar, better than I could ever imagine to achieve. However, it's not to my taste. You know, prose is like toppings to an ice cream, and unfortunately, I tried his flavour once and it was pretty good, but nothing that's going to make me pick it over like a flavour I enjoy more. So a couple of other books that I'm missing from my actual bookshelf at the moment are Steve Coote's Kafka, A Beginner's Guide, which is, as it sounds, a non-fiction portrayal into Franz Kafka's life. I knew basically everything that was in the book, so I haven't rated it specifically high on my individual list. All of the Fire Chronicles books in the Christie Lacy series, I read them when I was a kid and I still hold the first one fondly. They basically detail these little clay dragons that come to life and are real. The books are actually very slice of life looking back, but they kind of lost me when they got to polar bears. Mark Z. Danielewski's House of Leaves. I finished in about 5 days. I stayed up a couple of nights in a row and just constantly read it, taking some notes in the margins here and there. It fittingly starts to give you a literary psychosis. Yeah, it really does make you feel like you're travelling through a dark corridor or a horrible hallway. I liked it, but I wouldn't recommend it. Not all the time. Next is my favourite poem of all time, The Divine Comedy by Dante Alighieri. However, I've only got Inferno. I've got the full one over there, but I like this one because of the beautiful art. This is just Inferno, but I don't even know what words to use. I really like it. I just love the aesthetic. I read it when I was 14. I reread it when I was like 20, and there's perhaps only one other poem in existence that really hit me the way that Divine Comedy did. Next is Osamu Dazai's The Shameful Life, or No Longer Human. That's the new translation of Shameful Life. I think it's Ningen Shekuku in Japanese. It's the Sylvia Plath bell jar of Japanese literature. It tells a story of a depressed person's slow descent into suicidal impulses and eventually action. It's short, concise, and it leaves you thinking. And I like the various adaptations it's received throughout the years as well. It's always handled with a degree of care. Well, I say that, I think an anime version just came out that turns them all into robots or something. God. Sheila Delaney's A Taste of Honey is a kitchen sink play that precedes all soap operas such as Coronation Street, EastEnders and Emmerdale, but you can definitely feel its roots in all of those aforementioned products. Nothing fascinating, but it's a charming little quirky book with some really cool characters. I'm missing The Hanging Stranger, but I have read A Scanner Darkly by Philip K. Dick. It's like Fahrenheit 451 combined with Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas with a touch of Jekyll and Hyde. It's weird. It's got all of the touchings of a Dick sci-fi masterpiece. Charles Dickens' A Great Expectations is a chunky beast of a book, but a good one. I enjoyed seeing Pip's growth into adulthood. I enjoyed the thematic elements, the way that Charles Dickens always provides them. So Charles Dickens always provides a brilliant socio-political commentary, especially on British culture, and I like the way that he talks about the proletariat in such brutal detail. Although that's not as prominent in Great Expectations, it's nonetheless. No, actually, it is. It definitely is. The idea of becoming something better, the Bildungsroman of the class jealous. Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky is the only Fyodor Dostoevsky book I have read so far. Yes, you have permission to kill me. Notes from Underground is a brilliant short story of detailing cognitive dissonance, the inner thoughts that run rampant in our brains and eventually might manifest in the real world through real actions and consequences. F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. Brilliant take on the wealth and class divide of America. Some of the characters are so deep, especially considering the short size of the book. How many pages? Under 150 pages. He's able to do more with characters in 150 pages than a lot of fantasy authors are able to do with their whole series. Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl. Didn't enjoy the book. Do enjoy the movie. Civilization and Its Discontents by Sigmund Freud. A collection of essays and quips and letters. Some of the concepts featured within it, such as the oceanic sensation, I've never been able to stop thinking about. It's not the best of Sigmund Freud's work. I enjoy the interpretation of dreams more, which I actually don't have a bit, I think I lent it out to someone. Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology features Loki, Thor, Freya, and everyone else. The whole gang written in Neil Gaiman's prosaic and wonderful sing-song voice. This was recommended to me by a friend, and it's Alex Garland's The Beach. Brilliant, marijuana-infused Lord of the Rings with a very cerebral, psychedelic ending that'll stick with you. It's like you enter an EDM club at the end, the feeling in your head of a sudden bombardment of things happening. Oh, speak of the Fly, Lord of the Flies, William. Battle Royale-esque tale of a bunch of young boys trying to survive on an island is really cool. John Gribben's Computing with Quantum Cats from Alan Turing to Teleportation is a succinct, concise detailing of abstract aspects of quantum mechanics, ranging from multiple worlds all the way up to quantum entanglement and probability. It's really interesting. He tries not to go into the novelistic side of quantum physics, which I appreciate because I understand that with metaphysics a lot of the imagination can overtake. Thankfully, John Gribben never really runs guilty of that. Next is Yuval Noah Harari. So Sapiens, first of all, a succinct summarization of basically everything human. There are quite a few factual errors that I found essays detailing. However, the amount it covers is incredibly detailed and well sourced, and the majority of it is factually accurate. And yeah, Yuval Noah Harari is brilliant. He's going to go down as one of the best, I believe. We'll see. Yeah, you could always ruin that for himself, but I really appreciate his way of speaking, his dialect, and especially some of the arguments that he puts forward. His other book, Homo Deus, isn't as good, mostly because it's all theoretical, but it basically covers to the end of the 21st century. I believe it's just the next 100 years, I'm not sure, but yeah, the near future. Some of the arguments are amazing, some of them so good that it's hard to believe, but then you go and look into it and it's like, maybe, but there is a lot to... Things keep popping and banging around me. And then there's 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, which I didn't enjoy that much because it's basically just grabbing key moments from those two books I just listed and pushing it into 21 categories. But it's still a good starting point. Talking of starting points, Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. What's amazing is that you're able to read this and actually bloody understand what he's talking about. That before books like these started publishing, ideas of big bangs and black holes were not mainstream, and now you're seeing them in TV shows. You're going to see them in Shrek 4 now. I'm missing something. What do I miss? Oh, I'm missing Journey to the East. But these are the two other Hermann Hesse books I've read. Siddhartha's my favourite book of all time. I'm going to go into it in more detail in the future, but Steppenwolf is also very relatable. I'm hesitant to say entertaining. Like, when I look at a lot of the books on my shelves, a lot of them I read in high school, and it's amazing to think that I read all of this, and two more of these that I'm missing, like 5 in this series of Charlie Higson's The Enemy. It's about zombies, and the characters are all teenagers, and it's pretty much just nonsense. Look how long they are. Look how much I could have learned about anything except this. Next up is Anthony Horowitz's Ravensgate. I read this when I was 14. I can remember snippets of it and enjoyed it. One day I may have to go and check it out. I know it's actually a series of books, maybe 5 books, and I only read that one. You can never find the second in any local library, and this was before Amazon, so yeah, I'll have to check that out. Uh-oh, I know everyone loves this book. but I don't like The Kite Runner by Carlo Destini, and now I fear for my life. And maybe I'll go over it at some point. Maybe I'll reread it and do a video on it in the future to see if my opinions change. But when I was forced to read it in high school, I don't know, there were certain aspects of it that were certainly quite triggering, without any warning, because you just expected to just be alright with everything. But yeah, Aldous Huxley's Brave New World is my favourite dystopic novel. It's the one we're heading for, a utopia masquerading, or a dystopia masquerading. That's the thing. He poses the idea that both are pretty rubbish, so there's a lot more to it than that. Aspects of a lot of his left-leaning politics does come into play here. Ford and Marx and just the overbearing red symbolism. But there's some brilliant prose in this. Huxley is a master of his prose in my opinion. As I was saying about flavour earlier, this is my flavour. And I also enjoyed his follow-up essay collection, Brave New World Revisited. I believe he wrote it in like 30 years later or something like that. Let's see on the back. He wrote it like 30 years later, and it's basically a collection of his thoughts on this and how they've changed over time. Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go, heralded as some sort of modern day masterpiece. I wouldn't call it that, but it's really interesting. Really interesting. The questions it's posing have been asked a million times in the past before already, but you know, they're dressed up in a... It just doesn't feel condescending. It's handling heavy philosophical subjects and doesn't feel condescending. Some of it could be considered a bit nauseatingly happy, or rose-tinted glasses. My voice went then. It was a pretty good read. I enjoyed it, and I'm actually going to check out more of Kazuo Ishiguro's works. I believe he's actually British. The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. Look at that big boy. Look at that. It's not even that long either. Half of it is like... It's like 10 pages. 10 pages, and I can remember it so vividly. 10 pages, and I remember it more than all of Charlie Higson's The Enemy 5-book series. Isn't that incredible? And I read this in high school as well. And Kafka. Missing some of his books of his that I've read, and quite a few short stories, like a Crossbreed and whatnot, that are included in different collections. I haven't read everything in the collection, so I don't consider the collection read yet, but I have read everything in the Metamorphosis and Other Stories. I actually discussed a few of these stories in this book, the big ones, and I have read The Trial, which is one of my favourite books of all time. It's a modern day bureaucratic masterpiece, a bureaucratic horror masterpiece. It is the epitome of the Kafkaesque. It's the perfect amalgamation of capitalist oppression and general anime and absurdism. Is brilliant. It's just so good. Daniel Keyes' Flower for Algernon is another of my favourite books of all time. We're getting through those ones quick. Flowers for Algernon is amazing. I cried a lot at the end. And even thinking about it now gives me this feeling. It's about a janitor who has some sort of mental atypicality that makes it so that he can't really keep up with conversations or retain lots of information. He's offered a pill that makes him intelligent. It was parodied in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's such a good story. Man, the book's so good. Now we're on to Stephen King. We've got Carrie, which needs no introduction. Very good read. Good page turner. It, which everyone loves and I do not. 1085 pages. What I will reread, however, is one of my favourite stories of all time, Misery. And the movie is one of my favourite movies of all time. It's a brilliant story of a man, a writer, being held basically at gunpoint by his own imagination, or his fan base, depending on the reading, or just the moral obligation of the parasocial relationship that he chose to set up by writing. I don't know, is that victim blaming? I don't know. Really good book, which runs tantamount to his biography slash learning resource on writing, which is a memoir of his authorial experience, which is up there but stuck, so I'm not going to get it down. It's a book. Get rid of that, obviously. Rose Madder. Very lesser known Stephen King book, but it stayed with me my whole life. I read it when I was 12, and it's about domestic abuse and gaslighting, and it sends goosebumps on my spine. There's some scenes that fall into magical realism or horror magical realism, and you know, I haven't actually read it in half my life, but based on the narrative that I remember, it's quite feminist in its reading. I'm gonna have to actually check it out with that reading in mind, but I remember it being quite feminist in its reading. So, and the OG battle royale, The Running Man, tells the story of Arnold Schwarzenegger put into a competition where he basically has to survive to win a big cash sum. However, the whole world is out to get him. It's like Manhunt. This isn't a book, but it's definitely a book. Sometimes I say things. The Stanley Kubrick Archives is a collection of photographs, insights, essays, letters, etc., etc., about Stanley Kubrick as a movie maker. And yeah, it's not about the prose, and you can find it all online, obviously, but the book itself is beautiful. Skullduggery Pleasant by Derek Wendy is one of my favourite young adult novel series of all time. I've read the first 8 books in the series. That's about that much book. It did the thing. He's a detective, a skeleton detective, and they use magic, and they shoot fireballs. Things go bang. It's an hour long now. It's incredible. I actually forgot to mention, I'm missing The Shining by Stephen King. I don't know where it's gone. And I'm missing Maria Konikova's Mastermind, which is a how to think like Sherlock. A lot of it was just nonsense, but I like Maria Konnikova. She's a very interesting person, and some of her work is brilliant and stellar, so I gave it a shot, and it's entertaining. I like her work. I find it fascinating. Anyway, the quintessential book of racial injustice, To Kill a Mockingbird, was written by Harper Lee in the 50s, I think. Oh my god, 60s? I don't know. A long time ago. Atticus is one of the best written lawyers I've ever seen, and the moral and basic fundamentals behind the book, the principles that guide it, are just so well thought out. And it's also interesting to look into Harper Lee as an author's life as well. Next is Philosophy in Bite-Sized Chunks by Leslie Levine. I picked it up from the works and gave it a flick through. It's basically a listicle of philosophers with some quips here and there. C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia is the first book series I ever read in my life. I think I read these when I was 5-6 years old. But yeah, this was my introduction to fantasy in general, and I still enjoy it a lot. It's got a lot of flaws, and I don't agree with a lot of C.S. Lewis's personal philosophy, but you know, the characters are nice, and it was written in a time of war when kids needed to be whisked away to different worlds, and The Chronicles of Narnia fulfilled that whilst also reiterating many of Christianity's good tenant philosophies. So I can never hate it too much. Also, he was very good friends with Tolkien, and you can feel the inspiration run throughout all the book. Jack London's more banging. Jack London's The Call of the Wild. It's just such a brilliant, raw story. What's amazing is the environmental detail. You can feel the cold. You can feel the cold while you read this book. If there's one book I recommend you read if you want to feel cold, read The Call of the Wild. Isaac Marion's Warm Bodies is actually, you know, it's one of my guilty pleasures. I enjoyed the movie as well. I don't know why. It's got a quote by Stephanie Meyer on the front. Oh god. Well, it's the same, target. Simon Pegg. What a weird, disconnected collection of authors to put on the front. It's not adjusting. To put at the front of your necrophilia book, teenage necrophilia book. So you know, it's alright. I'm missing my Lovecraft books. I've read quite a lot of Lovecraft, almost all of his works, and I'm also missing Science Fiction, A Literary History by Roger Luckhurst, which was a fascinating read which goes over the conception, evolution of sci-fi as a literary genre, which I loved it. It was brilliant. Next would be George R.R. Martin's A Game of Thrones, the first book of the Song of Ice and Fire books. I've only read the first book. I read it in 2015, promptly jumped on the TV show bandwagon followed that ship until it sunk into the ocean with the poise and delicacy of the Titanic. But yeah, I've kind of not bothered reading any more of his books until he releases a new one. Even though I've only read the first one, I don't really see the point in getting attached to a fancy world that's not finished. I'm missing Breaking Dawn and the short, sweet life of Britannia or something, 2.5. But Stephanie Meyer's The Twilight series, guilty pleasure in high school. So many problematic elements. There are plenty of YouTubers that have covered it already, but so many problematic elements to it. Okay. Next on our list is Arthur Miller's The Crucible. This is the only thing by Arthur Miller I've read. I will get around to doing a video on Death of a Salesman at some point in the future. Next is one of my favourite authors of all time, so this is going to take a bit. Right. Haruki Murakami's After Dark. Not the best place to start with Murakami, but surprisingly one that's very endearing to me. He's captured the feeling of walking down a noisy city at 2 a.m. in the morning and the shops are open and people are out still and it feels like daytime. It's that, the book. After the Quake is a collection of short stories set after the Kobe earthquake in the early 2000s. Very touching. Some of them don't hit as well as other ones, but they're all revolving around dealing with it. It's Haruki Murakami's attempt to immortalise an incident that forever scarred Japan. Next is Colorless Tsukuru Tazaki and his Years of Pilgrimage. Very interesting and recent, quite contemporary story by Haruki Murakami. At least the translation is contemporary. Some of the narrative elements towards the end got a bit weird for me, but the actual story and the characters themselves, it was good. It also did withhold on too much of the Murakami flair that he embeds in a lot of his work, you know, sex, jazz, alcohol, weirdly written erotica. The Elephant Vanishes is a collection of abstract, sometimes magical realist stories, not all revolving around elephants, sometimes revolving around the outright mundane. It also does have a snippet that made its way into the first chapter of the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, I believe. So when I started reading the Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, I was very confused. I was like, I've read this. Yeah, he reworked it into a novel later. I just remembered these two while thinking about one of the stories in there, but Desire is a vintage mini collection of Haruki Murakami short stories about love. It actually does feature a couple of stories from The Elephant Vanishes, so I skipped over them when I was reading The Elephant Vanishes, and I forgot, I was showing you the wrong one. That's Desire. This is Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perceptions and Heaven and Hell. I've read both parts. I think this only has Doors of Perception in it, this one. Yeah, vintage minis was basically their way of repackaging things that you've already read before in cute little formats that I'm totally a sucker for. Dance 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 is the fourth book in the Rat collection of stories. To be honest, it didn't fascinate me as much as many of his other works. I like it because I got to revisit some of the places I visited in early work. Other than the Easter eggs and cameos, I wasn't particularly fascinated by the overhanging narrative in Dance Dance Dance. You'll never catch me saying that about Kafka on the Shore, though. I love this book. This is magical realism at its best. So many themes, pop culture references. You can guarantee I'm going to eventually do a video on this book. It's one of my favourite books I've ever read. Killing Commendatory. Look at that. This is his take on The Great Gatsby. Murakami was actually the person who brought Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby over to Japan with his translation. And he's always been a fan of Fitzgerald, so this was his take on that, and you can feel it, the inspiration is deep. But there are aspects of The Killing Commendatory that I actually prefer to The Great Gatsby. Norwegian Wood is my second favourite Haruki Murakami book, and also probably your best starting point. It's primarily romance. It doesn't concern itself with magic realism or some of the more abstract aspects of Haruki Murakami's other works. I want to do a whole video, maybe a whole video series on Murakami at some point, as he is one of my favourite authors. So, A Wild Sheep Chase is the third book preceding Dance 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 in the Rat collection of books, which usually feature a nameless protagonist whisked away in some sort of weird mystery from a boring or stagnating life. The main character adventuring with a girl who has magical ears to find a man dressed as a sheep. And we're on to the first two books in the Rat series. So it goes Hear the Wind Sing, Pinball 1973, Wild Sheep Chase, and then Dance Dance Dance. Yeah, I actually really love Pinball 1973. I can hardly remember Hear the Wind Sing, and it was Haruki Murakami's first novel as well, so it didn't impact me as much as most of his other catalogue. But I actually love Pinball 1973. It's the quest of a character looking for a pinball machine, but it's what that pinball machine represents to him. I actually think it's my favourite book in the Rat series, and then we're on to a different Murakami. Ryu Murakami's In the Miso Soup. It's the only Ryu Murakami book I've read so far. The tension throughout the book is palpable. You can feel it. You can taste it on the paper. I didn't lick the page. However, I think when it finally hits the bell curve, the crescendo that it's been building towards, it really fails to stick the landing. It gets grotesque and disgusting for the sake of grotesque and disgusting without any thematic resonance. And then you're like, okay, Friedrich Nietzsche's Twilight of the Idols and the Antichrist, two separate books combined in one. This is falling apart. Oh no. Oh no. Twilight of the Idols and the Antichrist. They're two of the best collection of my favourite mustachio German crazy philosopher man's aphorisms, arrows and vices, as well as little statements, and with all the boisterousness and grandiosity that you would expect of Nietzsche. For George Orwell, we've got On Truth, which is a collection of George Orwell's aphorisms and some quotes and paragraphs from some of his well-known works, including Animal Farm in 1984. Animal Farm, I said earlier, Siddhartha's my favourite book. It's probably my second favourite book. This is my favourite book of all time. I'm gonna go over it at some point in the future, although it's been critiqued, analysed, and dissected to death already. It does so much with so little. And 1984 really needs no introduction, to be honest. It's the dystopia novel. If you say, oh, dystopia, someone will say 1984. Or if you say, oh, stop twisting my words, someone will go, oh, it's very Orwellian, which isn't technically what Orwellian means. Orwellian's more the removal of words from a dictionary to gradually retrain and suppress the train of thought, and words are required. They're the tools and weaponry we use to craft language. John Osborne's Look Back in Anger is the epitome of the angry man of the 20th century. Look into that if you haven't, but it's very telling as a play. I would really have to see it live, I believe, but I enjoyed it and I couldn't stop reading it. Goth by Utsuichi is a collection of short stories revolving around two goths, teenage goths in high school, and they encounter some weird, horrific, scarring aspects of the village they live in. I actually read the novel because I read the manga when I was about 12, and I picked up the novel when I was about 14, and I reread it again about 5 years ago, and it didn't live up, but it was still really fun to read. Palahniuk's Rant. I haven't read Fight Club, believe it or not. Whoa. Rant is a trip. It's a lot like The Wasp Factory, or you really don't know what you've read. Once you've finished the last page, you sit there and you're like, let's see, some books that I've forgotten about. Elle Changed the World, which is the novelisation of the third movie in the live-action Death Note movies. The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen, which is a progenitor of Lovecraftian horror. No, it's not. It's not at all. It's a different type of horror entirely, but it's got the same sort of vibe. Nisio Isin's Death Note novel, The Los Angeles VB Murder Cases. I forgot to mention those. They were mentioned briefly in the manga and anime. Naomi Penderman, I think it is. It's a case that her and Al worked on. Oh, I forgot to mention Paradise Lost by John Milton. Just like The Divine Comedy by Dante, that's the other book I was talking about. These two poems, John Milton was a bit of a weird fellow. He actually believed he went blind because he was holding in so much gas. So, yeah. But what he's managed to do with his collection of poems is, unfortunately for him, popularised the Satanist movement with people like Percy Shelley and Mary Shelley hopping on after Paradise Lost. Perhaps before, don't quote me on that, but I know the character of Satan, he perhaps accidentally humanised Satan to such a degree that he made him a compelling hero. Really interesting epic poem, one of the best, if not the best. Joint with Divine Comedy for me. Now we're on to the Terry Pratchett books that I've read. First of all, we've got Good Omens featuring Neil Gaiman. Actually my least favourite Terry Pratchett book I've read. Not that, which isn't a bad thing, it's still a brilliant book. Yeah, you've probably already seen the TV show, which I'd say is actually a bit of an improvement over the book. Some of the narrative plots start up so early, end late, and don't really have much of a significance, and there's a lot of it that feels like a soft landing. Can't say that about Mort though. This is one of my favourite Terry Pratchett books, and the first book in the Discworld Death series. The amount of humanisation Death experiences throughout this, particularly my favourite Terry Pratchett book, Reaper Man, and Soul Music and Hogfather, is outstanding. Death is one of the best characters ever written in modern fantasy literature, I believe, and the amount of letters that Terry Pratchett actually received from people, children and whatnot, who were dying, and said that they hope that the death they end up meeting is the death he wrote. Each Discworld book handles a different commentary. Hogfather's a commentary on Christmas and Halloween through the lens of death. Soul Music is about the rock music industry. Reaper Man is about what if death just stopped and became a farmer and the consequences of that. And Mort is about death finding an assistant. So I love the imagination that Terry Pratchett brings into his works. These are the only ones I've actually read, but I'm hoping to get a Discworld series started on my channel soon. So we'll either start from the first book, The Colour of Magic, or we'll start from the first book of one of the series within Discworld instead. I don't know, we'll see. Now, I'm not actually that much of a fantasy nut, but with that said, the book I'm most excited for from fantasy at the moment would have to be the third book in the Kingkiller Chronicle by Patrick Rothfuss. The first two books have some of the most gorgeously crafted prose I've ever read from a fantasy novel. The characters are fully realised. Some people take issue with some of the female characters, and particularly with Crow as a Mary Sue. However, I feel like this is all part of the narrative structure, the unreliable narrator kicking in. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant series. Heard an adaptation's on the way. Please don't mess it up. You know, I was going to take them down, but I'm not going to bother. But yeah, Harry Potter, wonderful that is. Next we've got Oliver Sacks, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Oliver Sacks is a very prominent and well-known psychologist with a stellar wit. This book details some of the cases he has handled, some of the more bizarre or abstract cases that he's witnessed in his time as a clinical psychologist. Cases such as prosopagnosia, which is a deformation of the fusiform gyrus, usually resulting in the inability to perceive faces, you know, like it's just a flat plane, which is really cool. And we've got J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. This is a book that one day I'll say I don't like, and the next I'll say I liked a lot, and I can never fully make my mind up. I think I enjoy the book as an experience, but I didn't enjoy the book as a narrative, and I didn't enjoy Holden as a character. I see that's kind of the point. Does that change the way I feel? I don't know. Next up was Shakespeare, but I'm not actually going to go over that because I've read so many of his works, both in high school, college and university, that I don't know which ones I know and which ones I don't. So at some point in the near future I'm going to sit down and read Sherlock. But now we're on to a big one, and I don't really want to pick them up because I can't be bothered. So, Darren Shan. I read a lot of Darren Shan in high school, and I met him about 3 times. Really cool guy. So, Cirque du Freak is a 10 or 12, can't remember, part vampire novel series concerning the main character Darren and his exploits and adventure in life as a vampire. The first couple of books in particular I actually still think hold up really well, but I do feel like it went off the rails a bit towards the end. I do, however, enjoy Demonata a lot more. That would be all these. The rainbow fella here. I would love to meet Darren Shan at some point in the future, and I specifically want to ask him if Neon Genesis Evangelion or Go Nagai's Devilman, if either of those two are an inspiration for Demon Art. Yeah, I couldn't help but notice the parallels between those three, in particular, the end of Demon Art, Evangelion, and Devilman. So I really want to talk to him at some point. Either way, it was my introduction to the kind of Lovecraftian horror, the demon you can't understand, the creature beyond cosmic comprehension that will decimate any human that stands in front of it. And for a young adult novel, I enjoyed it a lot. However, one of my favourite of Darren Shan's books, in fact, possibly my favourite, would have to be The Procession of the Dead, Hell's Horizons, and The City of the Snakes. Those three books are so weird. I would love to see a Netflix or Amazon Prime mini-series about them at some point in the future. It's like mafia supernatural with Incan spirituality pervasively feeding throughout the thing. Kabak Raimi was a very interesting character to me, and I enjoyed the plot and the twists all the way through. Then you've got Lady of Shades, which I wasn't a massive fan of because of the plot twist at the end that I can't really discuss because it ruins the whole point of the book, but that's why I don't like it as a plot twist, because it felt like that was the point of the book. However, I did like The Thin Executioner. He created a fun, creative, imaginative, and entertaining, violent world for one little story about travelling to the top of a mountain to kill someone, essentially. But I haven't read it in ages, but I'm definitely going to have to check it out at some point again, because I remember liking it a lot when I was younger. And then lastly, of Darren Shan, we've got the Cirque du Freak follow-up series focusing on the adult vampire Larton Crepsley, who's the advisor to Darren throughout the series. I actually prefer him to Cirque du Freak personally. I found Larton Crepsley's character to be one of, if not the best characters written in the Cirque du Freak series, and I felt it was a good choice for us to go back in time and quickly touch on Larton Crepsley a bit more. Okay, so this book's going to be a bit of a weird one. Addict by Stephen Smith. This was a bestseller in 1997. In this true story, the names of the living have been changed to protect the innocent. Those dead can't hit back. Okay, so with that said, it also does say on the side, amazing true story. I worked with Stephen Smith a couple of years ago to bring out the follow-up book to Addict. And he repeatedly stretched the truth in the hopes to tell a more compelling story. But yeah, I recommend anyone who checks this out read it with a grain of salt. The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by Muriel Spark. A weird story of counterculture and perhaps conformity and de-individuation, if you look at it that way. I wasn't too fond of this book. There were some aspects of her little cult. The prose was fine, the story structure was fine, and I saw the movie and I liked that a lot. Book I am fond of, despite its length, would be Bram Stoker's Dracula. The narrative happenings could probably be confined to this much, but that's how much we're reading here. I love the narrative style. I love the word is evading me. It's written with letters. The one story from this whole list, if there's one story from this whole list that has characters that love each other the most, it would be this. That you could feel the amount of care that they have for each other. He's written some fantastic characters. Okay, so we're on to the last couple of books now, but before we touch on them, I just want to go over some that I missed. Eleanor Rees was one of the professors in my university, and she wrote a collection of poetry books, Eliza and the Bear and Bloodchild. There's also another of hers, Andraste's Hair, I think, which I haven't read, but they're gorgeous and so romantic and so soul-felt and wonderful, and she's a wonderful person. Percy Jackson series, I read the first 4 in the series, and I think they're brilliant. They are still brilliant, even as young adult novels. I think they're really good. Christina Rossetti's Goblin Market and Other Poems, equally brilliant. Have a lot of LGBT connotations, or at least lesbian connotations, and some brilliantly horrific picturesque scenarios that she lays out. What else have we got? Oh yeah, Darkness Visible, A Memoir of Madness by William Styron is a woke essay written by William Styron on depression, and he really, well, one of the main thesis or points of that essay collection that I've been trying to spread but just failed to do because of the nature of language is rename the term depression back to melancholia, because depression is such a silly word, you know, being pushed down a bit. Being pushed down, it's not quite that. Melancholy is something deeper, richer, more soul-touching word than depression. He feels, and I feel as well. But it's a brilliant essay or expose on depression that brought a lot of awareness to the field. Robert Swindle's Room 13 and Stone Cold, I read in high school and read again a couple of years ago. Very, very, very short young adult horror novels. One about homelessness and the other one about vampires. Room 13, I'd say, is this more superior of the other. The other one's a bit dehumanising, to be honest, but still, Robert Swindle's is quite an interesting author. And Anthony Falbury's Kafka, another non-fiction book detailing Kafka's childhood and writing influences. I think it was a bit better than the previous one I mentioned. However, both still pale in comparison to other works I've read, mostly online. So next we've got Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, one of the quintessential horror reads, and one of the first horror sci-fi books of all time. I could wax poetically about this book forever, so I will one day. I'll talk about it in a future video for sure. The bleak wilderness and depictions of the characters are so relatable, and the prose feels contemporary. It's amazing how fresh it feels, considering it was written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It's amazing. And we've got Gulliver Travels, Jonathan Swift, a parody of Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe with a left-wing perspective. I love it. It's very interesting. It's got some of the coolest world building I've ever actually witnessed in a book. I was surprised how much I love it. It's not about small people. It's about talking horses and castles in the sky and big people. So shut up, Jack Black. We've got Tolkien The Hobbit. I haven't read Lord of the Rings. Oh right, I know. I've got two different box sets. I'll get round to it on the channel for sure. That's definitely up there on my reading list. But The Hobbit as a standalone piece of fiction is still so stellar. It's so good. Okay, now to talk about something that did disappoint me quite a bit. Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation trilogy. Beautiful. First of all, look how gorgeous that is. The movie adaptation by Alex Garland is a lot different. However, I wouldn't say that's a bad thing. I think it's more concise. It gets a lot of the themes in the book across without the clogging and questionable plot developments that occur in the second and third book. The second and third book feature totally different protagonist changes that I feel hamper the overall experience. The best book, and the only one you really need to read, is Annihilation. This is a sci-fi horror masterpiece, I think. The other two are okay extensions. This is the mainline franchise without any of the filler. This is the filler and the OVAs that come with it if you want some more. Slaughterhouse-5 by Vonnegut, Kurt Vonnegut, is one of the greatest anti-war stories ever told. Billy Pilgrim's tale is legendary. The way it plays with narrative, time, perspective and linearity to tell a convincing retelling of the derailment that the bombings of Dresden experienced. The fun, comedic tone that makes you laugh every 5 pages, and the so it goes that leaves a fundamental marking on your character. It's a phrase that you'll never forget once you've read the book. You just can't forget it, and that's the point. He hammers it home. Okay, now we're on to Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray, one of my favourite stories about dichotomies and the duality of man. This one primarily focuses on aesthetic and hedonism and decadence, and I love it. I love it. It's like taking Baudelaire and Jekyll and Hyde and slam it. I forgot to mention Jekyll and Hyde. Jekyll and Hyde's a good book as well. Stoner by John Williams is one of my favourite novels of all time. It's a novel about no one. It's one of the most realistic glimpses into a fictitious entity I've ever experienced. I felt like Stoner was a real person. I'm missing the first one. Oh no. This is the second book by Chris Wooding, Havoc. The first one was called Malice. What's very interesting about this is it mixes graphic novels with novel. There are moments in it that's so goosebump inducing, so, just get right to the point of paranoia. And we're on to the last two books. Tori Young's Studying English Literature, which I read for my university course. It wasn't mandatory reading, but I ended up actually enjoying the prose. I think Tori Young's actually quite entertaining a writer, and I learned quite a lot from it. And disappointingly, the Holy Bible. What can I say? It's a hidden gem. That is it. That is all of the books I think that I've read, and that's not including all the hundreds of comics and manga I've read. So, God, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you managed to sit through it the whole way through, that's amazing, and I would appreciate a like or a subscribe or a comment or whatever. I don't really know. So, thank you very much for allowing me your time to ramble about books that I've read, even if I haven't enjoyed all of them. A vast majority of them I haven't enjoyed, unfortunately, but even when you don't enjoy a book, you learn something from it. You learn about what you do like. So every book that I've read, I do not regret reading. Anyway, thank you for watching this video, and I hope you have a very, 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 very. That's about that much book. It did the thing.